Valentine's Day on the horizon tomorrow, let's continue into the favorite ships of Team RWBY, today focusing on Ruby Rose herself. Now, out of the four girls that make up Team RWBY, she's the one who's shown the least interest in romantic relations in general. Blake has had Sun, Weiss has been interested in Neptune, Yang has even shown interest in the boys, right back at the beginning of Volume 1 when they were all at that giant slumber party before they were assigned to their respective teams and given rooms and whatnot. RWBY, on the other hand, no interest really at all throughout the RWBY series. Although in the manga anthology, Red Like Roses, she did actually go out looking specifically for a boyfriend in a chapter. And, of course, didn't find one. Considered any of the main guys, you know, Ren, John, a couple others, and ended up finishing with Weiss, and that's the one who she ended up choosing, which of course gives credence to our first ship, White Rose, which is one of the more popular ones for RWBY to be sure. And as I went over in the ships focusing on Weiss, they have had an interesting dichotomy as it's been going. They of course didn't have the best start, with Weiss and RWBY being opposite poles and very conflicting ideals. Weiss being raised in a very political family where, you know, she has to carry herself a certain way, and standing is important, so she always had to act prim and proper, where RWBY, also being advanced 2 years, was a little bit more immature. And at the beginning, with them conflicting and being forced onto the same team, there was definitely some tension there. And with help from professors, they've ended up growing as the series has progressed and have become extremely close, them being partners and relying on each other throughout this series. And I still say at the beginning of Volume 6, when RWBY used her semblance on Weiss and there was the intermingling of white and red, I still want to believe that that means something in the eyes of Rooster Teeth, but obviously, as this in the actual series, it just means that RWBY was able to use her semblance on Weiss. Now, there is another ship that's right up there in popularity with White Rose, and that is Lancaster, shipping RWBY with Jean. And this is honestly very understandable given how the two met and how they've progressed throughout the series. RWBY and Jean met being each other's first friends on their first day at Beacon Academy. And this likely due to them both being outcasts in their own way. RWBY, of course, as I mentioned, being advanced 2 years into Beacon Academy, she didn't know anyone, she didn't have any friends coming in, and Jean being in a similar way, not advanced ahead 2 years, but not coming from a previous school. We didn't know it at the time, but he had faked his transcripts, so I'm guessing they were drawn to each other unknowingly at that time, being outcasts. And then they ended up being paired off into their own teams and became leaders of their respective teams. RWBY then ended up giving Jean the same pep talk that Ozpin had given her, so in Jean's eyes, she was the one supporting him as team leader, not to mention his team was also doing that, but she was actively giving him morale boosts and everything along those lines, which strengthened their bond together. And as the series has progressed, they have been relying on one another and pushing each other forward, both being leaders, and it's been progressing from there. Now, there hasn't been any actual romantic interchange between them, as of course their focus has been on other things as the RWBY series has been going on, especially since the school days, but it wouldn't be hard to see how that relationship could form out of the friendship that they currently have, but we'll have to wait and see what ends up happening in the RWBY canon, and based on what we've seen, I feel like White Rose might be a bit more likely. And then since Volume 5, there's been an equally popular ship, that being Rose Garden, the ship between RWBY and Oscar, which is a very cute ship. When Oscar joined the group, he and RWBY were the closest in age, and Oscar seemed to warm up to RWBY faster than anyone else. They were training together, they are, with them being the youngest, they are the most experienced, especially with Oscar having no experience, and they have been training. RWBY has also been a support pillar for him, encouraging him along the way and helping him move forward. Now, of course, one of the main complaints with this ship is that in Oscar's head there are two souls, one of those being RWBY's previous professor, which throws a giant wrench into the program. Now, depending on how Rooster Teeth handles this series in general, or more specifically how they handle the conclusion, it could definitely be possible that Rose Garden could become a thing. Now, if Oscar and Ozpin's minds do end up melding together, I don't know if it's going to be possible to separate them even after Salem's defeated. Now, if they do stay two separate entities, which frankly I would kind of like, because Ozpin is an interesting character in and of himself, and having him be separate from Oscar would be quite interesting. And then, at the end of the series, when Salem is defeated, if she is defeated at the end, then her and Ozpin can go off together into the afterlife and be at peace. Then Oscar is free to be with who he wishes without Ozpin's interference, and then Rose Garden would be a cute endgame ship to have actually come about. With those three ships being the most likely for RWBY, there are also many other ships out there. And another one that is one of the more popular ones is Nuts and Dolts, that being Ruby and Penny shipped together. Of course, not much chance for that currently in canon unless Penny's memory was able to be saved on data chips and transferred to a new body, but it was definitely a cute one when Penny was alive. Ruby was Penny's first friend and was the first one to learn her secret that she wasn't human, and Ruby accepted her as that, telling her that she was human. There was definitely a strong connection, and I wouldn't be surprised if Penny did love Ruby for the things that Ruby had done for her. And Ruby, I don't know if she necessarily felt that way about Penny, but there was definitely a close bond there, especially with how Ruby was completely crushed at Penny being killed. Now, I hope Penny does come back, and it would be interesting to see if she comes back with her memories intact and how that ship might progress, because it's also a possibility. Now, the other ships that are listed, there's of course Ladybug, which is Blake and Ruby. Not too much credence for that, although cute because they like books. And again, Bumblebee being a more prominent one for Blake for sure, although Black Sun's also an option. But speaking of Bumblebee, there's also Enabler, which is Yang and Ruby. Of course, the most popular problem with that is that they're sisters, but I'm not going to shame that ship at all, because they would be an interesting couple if there wasn't the sister aspect. If they had been childhood friends, for example, their personalities would have been interesting to see together. But, of course, that's not actually going to happen in canon. Then there are other ships that are, although less popular than the previously mentioned ones, have very unique names that I just love that they come from the series. For example, Sugar Rush, being Ruby and Nora. Of course, both of them being hyperactive and loving sugar in their own right, this name just makes sense. There's Milk and Cereal, which is Ruby and Pyrrha. Of course, Pyrrha being the poster girl for Pumpkin Pete's cereal, and then Ruby because she likes milk. And then there's Quicksilver, which is Ruby and Mercury, a name that makes so much sense because Ruby's semblance makes her go quick. And then Mercury being Silver, on both of them having their silver eyes, although Mercury's eyes are just gray. And lastly, of course, you have to go with the strawberry ice cream, because Neo is best girl and you always have to include her in a video. But let me know what your guys' favorite ships are. Of course, I haven't mentioned all of them, as there are quite a few to go through. Let me know what your guys' favorites are down in the comments. And there's also a poll going on currently until midday on February 14th. Still over 24 hours left on the poll to decide what is the fandom's favorite ship. Of course, this being a small channel, it won't be representative of the entire fandom, but you guys can choose your top 3 ships to vote for. If they aren't listed, of course, you can add them on with the other button, and votes will be tallied on February 14th, and I'll post the results in a video on my channel. So feel free to go there and check it out. Also, feel free to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. And I hope you guys like this video, and I'll see you guys in the next one.